All right, everyone. I think that nothing really looks more like the collapse of Western civilization in the sense of like familial bonds and things like that than the fact that people are turning to online genetic services in order to scope out their ancestry. In times past, you had books of heraldry and things like that, and family trees and things of that sort. But over time, especially over the last couple of generations, people have sort of lost track of their actual lineage. And so they've turned to genetic services in order to compensate for that. This was always a bad idea. Never should have been done. Nobody ever should have used these services. They're not reliable anyway. Apparently, everyone is part sub-Saharan African, based again on faulty genetic sequencing more than anything else. 23andMe bankruptcy. Let's talk about that. This was something that some of us foresaw. This is why we never use these genetic services. It's amusing more than anything else. I mean, I don't think it's going to be used to develop bioweapons or anything like that, though it probably could. It's a privacy disaster, and everyone sane saw this coming. 23andMe is going bankrupt. They're selling off their genetic data, the data of 15 million people, to some third party yet to be determined, I believe. A link in the description, archived, of course. Entirely predictable. Who could have seen this coming? Somebody collects a shit ton of data on you, then they go bankrupt and they transfer it to someone else. We've seen this before in the tech sector too. Well, not with bankruptcy, but with a similar kind of thing going on with Facebook, actually. We found out some time ago Facebook was selling bundles of semi-non-personalized data, for example, to the Chinese. This has been going on now for well over a decade. Well, 2 decades now, I suppose. I'm losing track of time. I'm getting old. Older, as George Carlin would put it. Who could have seen this coming? Who could have seen that giving your genetics to a corporate entity could possibly end any way other than, uh, you know, fairies and flowers and things like that? Who could have possibly seen this coming? It was quite obvious. I'm glad to report that most clankers have reacted to this by saying, well, I never gave my data because I knew better. Good on you. That makes it apparently the skew for the people that were getting their genetic data taken by this private entity probably is lower IQ than the average population, which is good. That's the good news. The bad news is that their data was still effectively put on a server somewhere, and now it's going to be transferred to a third party. Now, it's not entirely certain that this third party is even in the United States, by the way, to the US users of this particular service. And you've got others. By the way, 23andMe is not the only company that's been gathering genetic data. Feeling that it was a massive gathering operation in part funded by the government. Um, This may sound conspiratorial, but I have no doubt that in some years or decades, we'll find out that was actually the case. Actually, the case. I've always got to do that. Giving your genetic data to other people is a bad idea. Again, years ago, well, many decades ago, people had like elaborate family trees. They had family books, things like that. They had oral traditions. They had stories. They told each other. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have television until fairly recently in human history. Hell, even radio. That's not that old on the human timeline. Before all of this, there were books and there were oral traditions and there were people telling stories over the campfire about, great Uncle Joe Watson and his exploits and things like that. And you could trace your lineage. But people became disconnected with the prior generations and didn't want to talk about their ancestry. And so it only goes back a very brief moment in time. For example, I know a bit about my grandparents. I certainly know about my parents. I know about my nuclear family and my close relatives and their goings on, but I don't really know anything prior to that. other than a very, very sparse ancestral lineage. I mean, I can trace that a little bit, but not fully. Things are beginning to break down. That is, people don't know about their ancestry in any meaningful fashion. It was never important that you know the exact genetic composition of your lineage insofar as where it comes from. Well, you're 30% broadly Eastern European. That tells you a whole lot, by the way. And of course, you're always 2 or 3% Sub-Saharan African. That's always on the list. In fact, there was one scandal I think I remember years ago. We had some scandal. I don't know if it was 23andMe. I don't think it was. I think it was one of the other genealogical, like genetic testing services. They had a scandal where they were deliberately inserting sub-Saharan African DNA into any person who was broadly white, and they were doing this on purpose, and it was artificial in nature. I wonder why they would do that. I have a feeling there was a bit of a psyop going on there. It reminds me of the Ashley Madison leak. Oh, I'm married and I want to have an affair. I'll go on Ashley Madison. Oh shit, it got leaked that I was trying to cheat on my spouse? Well, who could have seen that coming? Who could have known that proprietary, very private information that I once solely possessed, given to a third party, that could be a bad idea? It could be capitalized on. It can be leaked. It can be sold. It can be exploited. Why did people use these services in the first place is my question. Personally, I think for the most part, if a person chose to use one of these services, they have nothing to complain about. Why would they complain? They voluntarily used them. They decided it was a good idea. It wasn't, by the way, as we see for obvious reasons now. Why'd you use the service then? A handful of you probably use 23andMe. Well, I'm sorry to say your genetic data under contract now belongs to them. The sequencing that they made is not going to get deleted off of their servers. It's going to be transferred to a company that you did not want to work with. But you didn't read the contract now, did you? You just put in the cheek swab and you put it in the mail and then you had them sequence it. Well, I mean, that's wonderful. And by the way, it won't be the one with the added 3% sub-Saharan African, by the way. That's about all. Peace out.